Welcome, and thank you for joining us on phase 2 of the digital strategy for IBPOC artists and arts organizations. I am Perry Volgaris, Digital Associate with SAPAMO. We acknowledge that we live, work, meet, and travel on the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples that have cared for this land now called Canada. SAPAMO is located on the land on which the City of Toronto is situated, which we acknowledge is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. SAPAMO is committed to creating meaningful relationships and supporting a diversity of practices, art forms, and cultural expressions. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Joining us today is Anju Singh with Culture Brew. Anju, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Perry. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me okay. Yeah, good. Seems like it. Yeah, thanks so much. So my name is Anju Singh, and I'm here to talk to you about a couple of things today. I'm part of a project called culturebrew.art, which I have the role of technical director for that project with. But I also work on a few contracts. I'm a freelancer, so this is one of many projects that I have. And I work in development, software development, web development, but also hosting and security, data security. So one of the contracts that I have is with a hosting cooperative that's based here in Vancouver. And our primary focus is on Canadian hosting and privacy. And so when I started working on the culturebrew.art project, I became, I feel like one of the reasons that Valerie may have potentially hired me is because I care about these things, and these things were very important to her for this project. We're going to talk today about why privacy, security, and safety is so important in our work. But actually, the title of the workshop is Digital Tools for Anti-Oppression Work in the Arts, because we have to remember that when we're talking about marginalized people, I'm not just talking about BIPOC folks, but the intersectionality of lots of people who deal with different types of marginalization and the risks that they face online that perhaps other folks don't. So today we're going to talk about safety, privacy, and data security. My first slide is actually a land acknowledgement. This is very important in our work to acknowledge the land that we're on. So thank you, Perry, for doing the acknowledgement for Ontario. And so our land acknowledgement is that Visceral Visions would like to acknowledge that we're participating from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, colonially known as Vancouver, which is also, we call it sometimes Coast Salish. We also wish to acknowledge the long and storied history of all Coast Salish peoples, which includes their ongoing battle for human rights, territorial rights, and social justice, of fights that benefits every single one of us. So in previous sessions, I've talked about how decolonial practice is not just a benefit for Indigenous peoples. We all benefit when we participate in decolonial practice. And it's really important that we understand that these struggles and these fights that Indigenous communities participate in is really justice for all of us. We are grateful for their leadership, courage, and sacrifice, which informs and inspires our work and aspirations as artists who have the privilege of calling these stolen territories home. We'd like to honor the George family from Tsleil-Waututh. We would like to honor the Sparrow family from Musqueam. We would like to honor the Wiss family from Squamish. Great. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is digital tools and our work. And what I mean by our work, I'm speaking a little bit more generally, but I'm assuming that we're all here with similar values of anti-oppression, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So that's an assumption that I'm making throughout this presentation. And if I'm wrong, I mean, that's an interesting conversation, I think. If you're like, no, I don't want to do that work, or I don't care about those things, feel free to speak up and let's talk about it. But that is the assumption that I'm working with. And so safety, privacy, and security. So what do these things mean to us? And this is a really important question to ask yourself as you engage in the digital realm and when you start building, especially digital tools. So for culturebrew.art, these things are very, very, very important to us. So, you know, just thinking about the fact that in the online world, your information is really available everywhere, and there's a lot of risk for people. There's a lot of vulnerability. And so for us, it was super important for us to think about what these things meant for our communities that we serve. We didn't just want to have everyone's information just available everywhere, because we deal with some of the highest targeted and at-risk communities. So when we think about the fact that we deal with trans communities, Indigenous, BIPOC, Black and people of color communities, we really have to think about their safety. So we wanted to make sure that we weren't just posting information, personal information, or identifiable information that could put these people at risk or threaten their sense of security or safety as we built our platforms. And we really started to think it was really important to listen to these communities. So when we started to build the platform, we started early on doing consultation sessions with specific groups. So we had a group of LGBTQ2S folks that we consulted with, and we had groups of Indigenous folks that we consulted with. And then there was more of a general mixed bag, like you could just be of any demographic and show up, so long as you were BIPOC. And we had a group for people with disabilities. And the point of speaking to these groups in separate ways as well as together was that we discovered very quickly that the security concerns with the groups were very different. And so different groups had different types of concerns of what would be exposed, right? And I think that, you know, some of the things that we can share, some of the information that we collect, because we collect very identifiable information and identity items from our users, it could be really, really, really dangerous for these people. So I had a friend post on Facebook the other day and said, please don't out trans people. So don't say, hey, this is my trans friend. And that's a really important thing to remember, is outing someone as trans could be very, very dangerous for them. That's not a safe place to be. And so when we're collecting information about someone's identity, we have to be super, super careful that that information doesn't go out to anyone that they don't want that information out to. That is an identity that, an identifier that could lead to a safety thing, or to be traced or to be tracked by some people. I had mentioned in a previous session that my background is South Asian. And while I'm very proud of the culture that I'm part of, it's also has a history of homophobia. So I have family members who literally will not tell anyone except for me and my family that they are queer. And so if we were to expose that information or show that in some way to people that they have not, told, that could be, again, a safety issue, or just like create a bunch of stress for the artist that they didn't want. And so I think it was really, really, this security, privacy, and safety piece was really important to us as we considered these things. And so I think it's really important to think about what these things mean to marginalized communities. And they might mean similar things to other communities. I'm sure that, for example, a cis white man is also concerned about his information being online, his email being shared, worried his credit card will get stolen. Like, there's shared concerns around safety, privacy, and security. But then there is also additional concerns that come in with the communities that we serve. And we also really felt that it was important that, we not take a chance of, we even thought of situations like the American border, because they get very, very invasive. I don't know if anyone has crossed the border where they've demanded to open up your phone and they start going through everything. And so if you're crossing the American border and you have any sort of, political activity that they can find on your phone, or anything that makes them question the identity that you have, potentially like parts of your history or your background, that can become really unsafe for us. We realized that there was just far too much risk to store our data outside of Canada. And this really, yes, there's the privacy piece, which we're going to talk about today. We're going to be doing some fun stuff with privacy. There is the security, which is data security, making sure that, you're not just suddenly going to get hacked and 500 credit cards of your users or of your donors or of your membership are exposed, but also the safety. And so this is really a big thing that marginalized communities think about that perhaps other communities don't, and maybe they do. But when I cross the border, they ask, I was born in Toronto, and they ask the white people I'm with on the trip, in the car, wherever, about me as if I don't speak English. Meanwhile, they're looking at my passport that said I was born in Toronto. So, which I'm not offended by, because I don't want to talk to them anyway. So I'm like, oh, I'm glad you don't think I speak English. But it just, it's another reminder that we face different obstacles and we have different fears when we approach these things. So if we have those kinds of fears when we approach, for example, the border, you can imagine the kinds of fears and nerves we have when we approach any sort of digital platform that is asking for information. I actually think we can be sometimes a little bit more diligent, which is fantastic. But we need to know that about our users. And if the user doesn't know that, like if the user doesn't know that these risks exist and you're dealing with marginalized or vulnerable communities, then I personally feel it is our responsibility to make sure that they do know about that, and or we put protections in place. And so that's a big part of what we're going to talk about today. So my last question is, how can we implement better safety and security solutions in our digital engagement? So that's kind of the last piece I was talking about, which is, even if all your users said, sure, we don't care, throw it on Google servers, I'm totally okay with it. Or like, yeah, I'm not too worried about this, I'm just going to use this like crappy password. So when we talk about implementing better safety and security solutions in our digital engagements, this again is our responsibility. So yes, the users might say, I want to put in, Superman for my password, but we have to say, no, you can't do that. And so we have to set those systems up and provide the training to our team as well, to our staff. So I have some questions for you all. So these are things to think about. Where and how are you storing personal information? So personal information isn't just a couple of words. It's actually becoming, well, it is a legal term, and personally identifiable information is a super important thing for you to be aware of. So I'm going to be a little bit careful in what I talk about today, because we also have federal, and then we have territorial and provincial regulations around privacy and rules, and it gets really messy, and we're not going to go into the whole thing because I think everyone will just leave the session as well. So I don't want you to run away. And also we're going to talk a little bit later about what your solution is going to be to specifically figure out what all this is. But PII, personally identifiable information, is anything that can specifically identify somebody. And so that could be, social insurance number, a mailing address, even sometimes, if it can be connected to another piece of information. So there's some information which we can consider not personally identifiable. For example, like your work email is a public thing, probably, unless you work in some secret place, but it's usually public. Your name on its own, sitting by itself, is not technically personal information, because it's possible that I might be the only Anju Singh, but it's also possible that I might not be the only Anju Singh. So you would need something in addition to my name to personally identify me. So personally identifiable information is any information that could make you go, aha, it's that person. And what's really interesting, I talk to lawyers all the time about this stuff because I work on digital products where we have to have these consultations and these conversations. So they're long, they're boring, but it keeps me up to date on what's happening. And my most recent conversation about this was super interesting because personally identifiable information to me was always like your credit card number, your birth date, your social insurance number, your name, your address. And I understood that if you connected your name and your address, that would count as personally identifiable information. But what I didn't realize was that even in like your programming, so for example, someone attended, like you have the person's name, and then you have their attendance at a session, and then you have their address. That becomes the risk of the level of privacy that you have to put into that information is you need to put a higher measure in, because now someone could put that together and go, so and so this address, and they went to that thing, and they can make all those connections. So we really have to think, the question is basically how how easily can we find this person? How easily can we go, aha, that's Perry, or aha, that's Victoria? And so it's really important that we think about this. And we are responsible for the personally identifiable information that we collect. It's our responsibility. If you collect all this information on a notepad as an organization, and then you leave that notepad in the park, you're responsible for that. So this first question, where and how are you storing personal information, is really, really important. If you're storing really sensitive information about your audiences, your users on Google, that's a risk, because that is an American server. And I mean, it depends on the type of risk, but to me, it's a risk that you have taken. If you're going to have a huge list, I had somebody yesterday ask me for a CSV, so basically an Excel file, a data file with like a download of data from one of our systems. This is for a non-arts project. It's a nonprofit project, and the contents are highly, highly sensitive. And there was a lot of data in there. And they said, oh, can you email it over? And I was like, no, we're not going to email this over, because email can be hacked, and an email can be caught in the middle. I don't know what's happening on the other end of the email either. Because I was responsible for that data, I did not feel comfortable to send that really sensitive data over email. And so we found an encrypted means that what's the best definition of encrypted? Does everyone know what encrypted means, or would everyone just like to talk a little bit about encryption? Oh, people know what it means. Okay, great. Okay, so if we know what encryption means, then basically, yeah, we talked about encryption. Like, you want your data to be encrypted as it's traveling. It's called encryption in transit. So encryption in transit is often TSL or SSL. And then there's encryption at rest, which is when the place where your data is staying at rest is encrypted, on the hard drive, for example. And so for me, I did not feel comfortable to send over this data. And I think that it's weird, because even though this person, I think, really appreciated me saying no, and even though I'm known for this, and even though I get hired because of this, I still had that moment of like, I'm being difficult. And I just want to say that just remind yourself that if you're nervous about anything to do with data that you carry, especially personally identifiable information, please do not question yourself, because the implications of a data breach is huge. And we see this all the time, right? Like, so all these big companies, they have data breaches. I think Canada Revenue Agency had another data breach like yesterday or the day before. And so, I mean, the government's having data breaches, but the government and all these bigger companies, they have like cyber insurance that probably covers millions of dollars. Here in BC, the fine for having any level of data breach, even the smallest privacy breach, is a $100,000 fine. And so it's very costly for us. So it's important for us to not question ourselves when we go, actually, I'm not going to do it that way. And I think especially, tech people, we get this reputation, like everyone's just like, oh, they're so difficult. They're like teasing me about my Pentagon level passwords. Yeah, we can take it because we know you all make fun of us. But the thing is that also we're kind of right. And so it's probably a good idea to listen when we tell you to increase your password security or not send something over a certain way. We're not just being paranoid tech people that never leave the basement. So the next thing is who has access to the information? That's important. So that's a big thing that came out of, there's so much to say around this and I'm not going to go too far into it, but basically, who has access is super, super, super important because this is actually how you can trace back any sort of a breach. And also it can really tell you if you're acting in with integrity in terms of security for your data. So who has access to your information? So right now, a lot of organizations, because I go in and I do cleanup of this kind of thing, and it's kind of scary to me because I get in and I realize that everyone in the organization has access to all the information. That's super dangerous. You don't want that. You want to make sure, and privacy requires that, especially with personally identifiable information, only the people who need access have access. And need is defined by you. So it's not just like, oh, I don't like you, so you can't have access. You don't need access. Or it can't be like, I don't think you're responsible enough, because that means that maybe you should do some training or you should hire someone different. So need has to be like, I have to send a MailChimp newsletter. I need access to this information. And that's considered okay. Like what you use the data for has to be part of your business. You can't use the data to be like, oh, I'm going to take this mailing list and just go promote my own show, which has nothing to do with this organization. So you have to be respectful of how you use the information. But access is a big, big piece. And that's where, like, for example, things like revision tracking, which you probably see in a lot of like CRMs and other types of software, will help you do. They'll help you understand who had access to what. And that's important because, it does happen. Like, I'm sure we're all very honest and we only do our job and none of us does anything wrong. But sometimes something happens and you have to go, okay, how did someone, like, why did this person go and look at this data on this day? Revision tracking helps you do that, helps you, or access logs, or as they're sometimes called, will help you see who looked at what. So having software that tells you where people went is a really good way of ensuring and maintaining your privacy. And again, for in anti-oppression work and working with marginalized communities, this is really, really, really important to us because these communities are giving us, especially on projects like culturebrew.art, they're giving us a lot of sensitive information, even just with like any other company. I'm sure all of your projects and organizations are collecting a lot of sensitive data. And it's really important that we remember that when we ask for information, that we're promising that we're only giving this to people who need it. And that shows up in your privacy policy, that shows up in your terms of use or terms of service. So that's something to keep in mind. There was something else I wanted to say about access, but I don't remember right now. So I'll come back to it. Where are your emails, website, and your documents hosted? So that's another big thing. So, document storage isn't just important because it's driving you nuts that you can't find that one spreadsheet from like a year ago. It's important because you also you have a responsibility again to maintain your records. So the Societies Act, this is a responsibility of societies, of nonprofits, to make sure that your documents are stored in a way that if something happens to the society, that the society, like the owners of the society, sometimes the board, if the board didn't go rogue, it's the board, needs to be able to access everything. And so where your documents are hosted is super important. It should be somewhere centralized. It should have a backup. And again, access control. So who has access to what documents? especially sensitive documents like HR and whatnot, where your website is hosted. So your website hosting, I mean, like if you have what's called a brochure site, or what I'll call a brochure or a marketing site, um, it kind of doesn't matter if you put it on Squarespace, in my opinion. Someone else might disagree, but putting it on an American server that, hey, we're an art gallery and we put up art and we have only publicly approved facing bios about our artists and our team, then, it's less of a risk. But if your website is more like a portal or something that you can log into, or a platform like culturebrew.art is a platform where people log in, I really think that it's important to store that data in Canada on secure servers. And I would highly recommend encryption at rest for your servers as well, which is, some people might consider it overkill, but I pay an extra $20 a month to have encryption at rest on our server. And I think it's so worth it to just pay the extra $20 a month and to know I'm doing one more diligence. And so that's important. And then where your emails are hosted, this is kind of an extreme one because email is a nightmare. So I've always found email so difficult. And it's because email is not just because it's volatile, because it is. Things can go into like different places and you're like, what happened? Email is also, it feels very competitive. Like it's like Google gets mad about something and then all of a sudden Google can stop certain emails from coming in because there was some kind of a breach or some kind of a worry that something is spam. And then email authentication, what's called SPF, DMARC, and DKIM play a big role in how your email is managed. I'm not even going to keep going. There's so many reasons why email can become really difficult to completely secure and to have like, for example, in a self-hosted environment or in a even Canadian hosted environment. So there's a lot of reasons why most of us just use Google. And as nonprofits, we use G Suite, right? Because it's easier. And so when you use G Suite, you don't have those nitty gritty problems I described that makes email such a nightmare. But there's other nightmares with dealing with G Suite and Google, where right off the bat, like I'm not going to send a lot of things over Google email. And so then I have to find other solutions. And it makes me a bit nervous because one thing I support organizations with is moving them over to G Suite for nonprofits. I'm not coming here. You're going to see when I'm speaking later, it's going to look like I'm a Google hater. I'm not. I don't hate Google. I think, well, I do kind of like for their values and whatever things, but I think that there's a place and a time to use that tool. So I do support organizations with getting connected and set up with Google for nonprofits, G Suite for nonprofits, because it's free for any nonprofit, society, or charity. And it really streamlines this access piece for me in terms of the shared drives. But the issue that I have with it is when I've done a few of these setups, there's been times when, we've needed things from one account to another and something was accidentally deleted. Like I have a background in tech. I know that even though they deleted the data, it's sitting on their server because we don't just delete things and then it just disappears. It's usually backed up somewhere, it's on a server, or in fact, it often stays on the server for 30 days and then some script will wipe it. So I asked Google, like, oh, there was a mistake this client made. Can we please get that data back? And they said no. And I pushed them really hard, poor service agent. And he just said, his response to me was, he sent me the policy. It's Google owns your data. So when I was making the case that, hey, this is our data and you're holding it hostage, and I know it's on a server there, and I know you have it. And he was like, no, Google owns your data. This is not yours. And I was completely freaked out. It actually made me so nervous to have that experience. That story actually turns into a really interesting story because this guy really felt for me And also, I think he might be part of a really good movement happening in Google of people who are questioning some of this. And he actually just wrote me privately and said, hey, yeah, you're right. We do have it. Let's figure out, this is what you need to do to get it back. So I had to say that, someone else who wasn't authorized deleted it. And then Google finally recovered our data. I find that very, very weird because I work, as I mentioned, I have one of my contracts is with a hosting company. And if you were to call the hosting company and go, blah, blah, blah happened, as long as you're an authority, you can get your data back because it's yours. Like it's your data and legally it's yours. But with Google, I couldn't do that. And I found that really interesting and frightening. So when I think about, when I ask where are your emails, your website, and your documents hosted, it's these kinds of considerations that I think of. Where are your emails? The thing with that, like I said, I don't think email hosting is easy. And I know it's not easy. And so the companies that you'll find that will host their own emails, organizations, collectives, usually not, have a strong IT department. So they usually have IT that can like really manage this. So sometimes they'll even have the server owned by the actual organization and someone's running it. I don't know the sizes of everyone's organization here, but the organizations I work with, even the bigger ones, like budgets of up to, $10 million, don't have the in-house capacity and infrastructure to do that. So self-hosting email is not easy. And also I find, especially as a person with a tech background, the one thing that people like, when the website goes down, yes, everyone panics and they yell at you and they get mad. Like it's stressful and you're like, oh no, the website's down, that's fine. But when people aren't getting emails, holy smokes, it's like it gets dramatic very fast. So people not getting their emails is very, very risky, I think. So the next item is, what are the risks for data security privacy breaches for your organization? And so, I think this is really about you doing a self-analysis. So when I talk about risks, I think it's important to understand the risks that you face. Especially like, for example, for us, we had to do this analysis of understanding, culturebrew.art. We knew that we were collecting all this personal information. So we knew that the risk for the types of data that we collect being leaked or being compromised was very high. We knew that the implications could be really big and serious. And so we took certain measures based on that. And to me, I feel like this is really about risk tolerance. And so if you feel like you have a high level of risk tolerance, so for example, let's go back to the example of like the Canadian government, like of course the risks that they face are very, very high and very serious because they're dealing with extremely sensitive information, but their risk tolerance is also high. Right? Because they have those systems set up. They have money and they have IT people. And so with your organization, if you can't take the risk of a data breach, that will make you make different decisions. So the organization that, the scenario I was telling you about with the G Suite stuff, the risk tolerance was very low. Losing that data was not an option. And with one error, the data potentially would be gone forever and not recovered because Google owned it and they just said no. And so if the organization has low risk tolerance, then you need to put measures in place to ensure what if something goes wrong. And especially organizations like us, I really feel in our sector, we bring people in and we're like, hey, cool, you're an intern, or okay, I'm going to hire this junior person. And we tend to give too much access to the second point. Be careful of that. But in practice, yes, we sometimes go, here's the admin for the G Suite. Next thing you know, something's deleted So your risk, your chance of risk is very high, and then your risk tolerance is low. So in that case, if there could be something that could go wrong, you would put other measures in place. So for example, if you're using G Suite, perhaps you would you would do a backup, your own backup, not depending just on Google servers, your own backup of all your G Suite stuff, which they offer as part of their package. Just going to move to Taslim's question here. I'm an independent arts worker. I don't have my own company, but I use Google for everything, my email, my documents, my photos, and my safe. Well, I mean, again, that really depends on the level of risk with the data that you're using, the content, and then your risk tolerance. So as an independent arts worker, my assumption is that you're not emailing back and forth about, with someone's name, address, and their mental health details. And so to me, because it's not, if it's not super high level personally identifiable information, I think your ability to take the risk of a data breach is much higher. So the question I would ask yourself, Taslim, is like, what would happen if my email got hacked? What would happen if I accidentally deleted everything and I can't get that back? What would happen if someone saw some of my documents? So that will let you know, that will let you make the decision. It's really important that we understand, like, the idea of these hard and fast rules, which we often get. And I think that definitely my colleagues in the line of work that I'm in, the technical side of line of work I'm in, not the arts administrator side, but the technical side, they get very like, this is right and this is wrong. I think is a little bit hardlined when actually it's really about what can you risk? What are your, and the next point, what are your responsibilities, your legal responsibilities around the information you process? This is about compliance. So compliance is, the privacy rules that you're bound by, which are not going to be the same anywhere. When you do a privacy impact assessment, a PIA, I can actually throw in a link for that. Actually, I probably should. Actually, I'll do it on the break because we're about to take a break. But when you do this kind of an assessment, and I'm actually going to give you another assessment to do, which is part of another project that I'm doing around self-assessment for this kind of thing. It's when you determine what your legal responsibilities are, the compliance responsibilities, and also your own risk tolerance and your own risk factors. So what are your organization's legal responsibilities around the information you process? It seems like we're not all organizations. It seems like many of you are independent practitioners. So that's something that I want us to think about as we do this next thing. But what we'll do is we'll take a quick break. I'm just going to run a poll before we do a break. So this poll is really to understand your interest in privacy, because that's just going to help me understand, where you're at, but also how much convincing I might need to do to get you to care more. And so, yeah, if everyone can just fill out this poll. Can everyone see it? Excellent. I'm just going to share these results because I always find them so interesting to look at. So the first thing, I am an expert, was only one person. It wasn't me, by the way. I would not consider myself an expert. And I wonder if it's because I keep trading on it that I keep getting more scared. So I am very nervous about, I feel like there's always new things coming in. There's always something new that I learn about, but it looks like somebody's feeling like either they're an expert or they're doing a great job in their work organization. And I'd be really curious when we come back to hear from that person if they're comfortable to share about what they're doing, because that could be really positive for the rest of us, some good advice. So whoever answered that, if you wouldn't mind after the break, just shooting me a message and speaking to that would be fantastic. Very concerned, and I consider it a priority. I and my organization have done some work, but have more to do. And so that's, I think, really a commonplace for a lot. And I'm not surprised that it's one of the highest responses. This next one, the next one that got 30%, concerned, and I know it's important, but because of my other priorities, I'd rather have someone else help with it and do it for me. It's really hard to do this stuff off the side of your desk. So I just want to say, I totally get it. That makes sense to me. And then I'm aware it is important, but I don't think it's a priority for me or my organization. I'm wondering if that's Tasleen because of your question. And so independent practitioners will often not worry too much because we don't carry so much sensitive data. It's more copyright and our personal stuff. Emphasis on the importance of, secure passwords and very different passwords for everything. But again, it's like, if you want to use Anju's Pentagon passwords, how are you going to sit there and type them? So you need to have some kind of password manager you can copy and paste from. So I think the most important thing based on what you just shared is that we actually, there is lots of stats and data that support this, that most data breaches happen from the user side. It's us. We are the biggest vulnerability in all of our systems. So you can sit here and you could be like, okay, we're going to lock this down. We're going to throw it on this server. We're going to make sure none of these passwords are shared. We're going to make sure of this. We're going to make sure of that. But we are the biggest vulnerability. We're the opening. And so when we do not secure our passwords and when we do not store them in a secure way, we really open ourselves up for that. And so most breaches happen on the user side. They happen from us. And like I said, oh yeah, a company I worked for had all the passwords in a spreadsheet on an openly shared drive. That's extremely common. Yeah, and I think that like having that shared Google sheet and stuff like that, it makes sense. Like from, because I've worked in nonprofits for like most of my professional career. And so this is my sector. And, I love us. I love all you. I think we're trying our best, but this is a really common practice. And it's because we're stressed. We're overstretched. We're under-resourced. Anything that costs money, we get scared. So even like bringing to your manager or to your board, like, hey, we want to pay for, let's say, one pass at, $10, $20 a month becomes, it's not budgeted in the 3-year operating budget that we get, if we even get operating, because most of us are on project grants and then we don't even know if we have money. Anyways, I'm not going to make you relive the trauma of the reality of our financial situations, but it's basically like we do not have the infrastructure to always support these things. But I think the risk of having those breaches is a bigger concern than the cost. So we have to weigh those out. But yeah, so I think, I think that this was this is an important piece for me, is that, how are these breaches potentially happening? And it's usually our error. So, and when we think about that, we also have to go to our users. So when we go into like building platforms like culturebrew.art, one of the conversations that we had was when we made the password requirement, when you set up your account, is how strong should that password be? And we went for stronger rather than weaker. At first we went really strong. Like it was like 16 characters, and then the users were like, this is horrible. So we went, a little bit less extreme than that, but the idea is we required the passwords to be strong. So that's an important piece of what we could be doing. So what we're going to do right now is I'm actually going to get you all to do a little bit of a self-assessment. So there's a couple of things that I had mentioned before we had taken our break, a privacy impact assessment. This is, I'm going to be honest, it's grueling. It's like really, I find it really boring to get through. I had to get on one of my projects, the financial administrator to help us, because I was like, I can't read so much legalese and get all the documents. But and then on another project, it wasn't a good use of my time to go through all of this. So then we hired a lawyer to help. Lawyers are very expensive. To do the entire privacy piece with a lawyer hand holding and walking us through it all was to do for the whole organization, build a privacy policy for the website, for online forms, and for collecting information was around almost $10,000 because lawyers are expensive. So for the other organization, we didn't have that money, so we did it in-house. And so we only paid the lawyer to look over the final version, and it cost us, $800. So, but it was a ton of work on our part, and it's still actually happening. So what this is the British Columbia version. I know many of you are from Ontario, so I tried to find the Ontario one. I'm not as familiar with the Ontario stuff, but basically privacy impact assessment is the opportunity for you to go through, and it's going to ask you a lot of questions. So it's going to ask you how you're using your data. It's going to ask you where you store, how you access the data. This data linking stuff is part of it as well. The programs and activities, which also tells them the type of work that you're doing, because I think that's really important. Can everyone see this, by the way, the Word document? I just want to make sure, okay, good. I just want to make sure you're not just being like, what is she looking at? The data flow diagram, oh yikes. Like this is for like people in my role. This is something that I do a lot, this kind of stuff. So this is, this is basically like how you map out, how you collect the data, everywhere it goes, and who touches it. It's a really valuable exercise. And again, we can go back to our poll where it was like people had said, a good 30% of you had said, oh, I want to do this, but I can't do this off the side of my desk. And you can see now why. This is like really difficult to do off the side of your desk, this data map. When you're building digital products, which I know some of you in this session are, you really want to think about the fact that like for things like culturebrew.art or anywhere where we collect information, we need to show this, and we need to be able to understand this and share it, right? So if somebody calls you out for privacy breach, so privacy law in Canada allows people to go, I want to see how you're handling this, and you have to provide it. You would have it in advance. So this is very helpful. Personal information data flow table, that's just the table version of the diagram. Risk mitigation. So risk mitigation is what we're talking about. So Pavan had said, oh, we use OnePass, I think it was. And so that would be risk mitigation. Having only one person have the master password to OnePass is risk mitigation. Changing passwords every 6 months is OnePassword, sorry. Changing passwords every 6 months on a requirement every year, whatever your process is risk mitigation. I just also want to say one more thing about the master password. It's very common also to, in addition to having one person have the master password, putting the master password in a safe in case that person, something happens. I hate that we always say in case the person gets hit by a bus. I hate this expression. We use it a lot. I feel in nonprofit. No one's getting hit by a bus, but hopefully. But in case somebody decides to leave without notice, or in case someone gets fired, if you have those in a safe, that's a good idea. So you just put in here your risk and then your mitigation. So these examples are fantastic, actually. Requests may not actually be from client, i.e. their email address may be being used by someone else. The mitigation strategy is implementation of identification purposes. And then this is what I was talking about, the risk factor. So the likelihood of that risk and the impact of the risk. So how likely could somebody be pretending to be someone else in email? That's actually, I'm surprised it says low. I would say that's medium, because that happens a lot, right? That you get these emails and it's like, oh, it's not, well, actually, I feel like we see more on Facebook where someone's like, I found this video of you. And you're like, that's not my friend, that's someone else. But, and then the impact is like, well, how does this impact your organization? How, not just the organization, but the people. And so let's go back to anti-oppression, because right now we're in privacy land without our anti-oppression lens. Put our anti-oppression lens back on. We're dealing with marginalized communities. It's not just the risk to you. We're not just all like colonial capitalists who only care about ourselves. It's also the risks to your users. So even if the impact to you is very low, what impact could that have on our communities? As we discussed before, outing someone who's trans is very, very dangerous. If you're carrying that information, I would say, to me, the impact would be high, because that's super dangerous for people to have those types of identity things leaked. in attachment with their names and other information. Collection notice. Oh yeah, this is really important. So privacy policy on your website, or when you're collecting information on forms, any sort of data collection, tell people why the information is being collected, who's collecting it, and then how they can contact somebody if they are concerned about their privacy, usually a privacy officer. And then the security of personal information. But you can see, like, this form is long and you're probably already bored, so I'm going to stop because you can look at this on your own. But that's what I was saying, like, this is not an easy thing to do. And then the other one I wanted to point out was, so I found the Ontario one. So I think this is government. So there is, or maybe this is Ontario, but there is FIPA, which is the federal privacy regulations. And I don't know who falls under privacy here, federal here. It's usually like universities and government and stuff like that. I think hospitals maybe. And then there's PIPA, and PIPA is your is societies. So nonprofits fall under that. And they have, Ontario has this guide because the form is so brutal that they made a guide. So that's how they actually made an entire thing where they actually just explain it all, and it's really great. It tells you why to conduct a PIA, privacy impact assessment, the methodology behind it. Here's the what is personal information section. So, you know, their biographical details, nationality, religion, marital status. I just want to point one thing out though. In our sector, demographics are important, especially as we're looking to do, again, anti-oppression work or do systems change work, where we're really trying to change the demographic and the face of our sector. And we need these stats sometimes. So if you can disconnect the person from the demographic information you're collecting, that does not become private information. That's not personally identifiable information because there's no person attached to it. So what we did in work with a lawyer in one situation was that there was all this stuff done, and then in a completely different server and on a completely different system, we ran a demographic survey that was entirely optional. There was no way to connect those demographic pieces about people's ethnicity, their age, their gender, sexual orientation back to who they are. So it allowed that organization to de-risk carrying that information, but gave them the important demographic information to be able to do statistical work and systems change work. And another reason, again, going back to only collect what you need, do not collect more than what you need. This organization did not need your ethnic identity to do the work they needed to do. It was not needed. Therefore, it should not be collected. It's a risk, and it goes against, it would probably fail your privacy impact assessment to collect it. So, but they wanted it statistically, so that's different. Then it has to be detached. It cannot be personally identifiable. So I just wanted to flag that, you know, we do want this information, but we don't want to put ourselves in a risky situation. Yeah, I mean, you guys can all go through this. I can drop some links maybe to Victoria after, and she can email them out, or is that okay, Victoria? Okay, just to save time. But yeah, so there's document personal information flows. So that's the dot diagram that we talked about. This one, oh, this one's a lot less ugly. This one's got colorful stuff in it, so that's good. Yeah. So I just wanted to flag that there's all this work being done. But I'm actually going to stop us for a second, and I'm going to get us to do a small activity. So this is another project that I'm working on. As I mentioned, I'm a freelancer and I work on a few projects. So one of my projects is working with PLEO, Pacific Legal Education and Outreach, an organization that's headed by Martha Rands, a lawyer who works specifically in nonprofits and arts. And she's located here in BC. And she put together this tool. It's like extremely generous of her, that she's building, which is basically a way for you to understand legal compliance as nonprofits. So I thought, oh, wow, I'm doing this session. This is totally related. This is really relevant. So this is actually just a prototype. What I'm in the middle of building right now is the full version. And so we're actually building a platform where you as nonprofits, artists, practitioners can go in and you can get all this legal information. Like everything I'm telling you, you basically don't need this workshop. You just basically could be like, I'm going to go to this tool, I'm going to get all the information that I need, get all your questions answered. And the thing, as I pointed earlier, if you get a lawyer to handhold and walk you through this process, it's very expensive. The idea behind this, because we're dealing with nonprofits and arts organizations who don't have a lot of money, is that you would instead do this assessment, find out what you're missing, find out where your gaps are, and then you can choose where to spend your money and you can choose where you need help. And so we're hoping to save a lot of cost and that feeling of nervousness a few of you mentioned around privacy and security. This is meant to reduce it. So I'm curious to see what happens. I'm going to drop the link to this assessment, this self-assessment, into the chat. And I'm going to give everyone a few minutes to do it. I think what I'm going to do is, can everyone see the LSALT 2.0 on my screen? Yeah. Okay, great. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to fill it out while you go so that I know how long it takes you. And then let's reconvene. When you're done, maybe just throw in the chat done or put up a little thumbs up because I might be slower or faster than you. And then we'll reconvene and see what everyone thought. So yeah, let's take a few minutes now to do this. If you're not an organization, some of the questions might not be as relevant for you, but just try your best. I don't want anyone to feel rushed because there's a lot of valuable information in this, but just stay on this page when you're done. Some of these questions may not be relevant to all of your work, but I know some of you are building digital platforms, and this is, you want to do this early. I had told a story in one of my other sessions about how one of my projects waited. So culturebrew.art, we did privacy like right away because Valerie Singh Turner, the project director, is on the ball. So she was like, we need to take care of privacy. Another project I worked on, I had mentioned privacy early and I'd said we need to do this, but then for internal reasons, they waited really late. It delayed the project by 3 months to launch. So if some of you I know are building a tool right now, the fact that you just did this is a step forward. And then the next thing is going to be, as you start to go into how your tool works, is when you're going to start doing the next piece of work. So things like the privacy policy that came up in the assessment, in the test, asking what kind of information you collect, making sure you're clear that, hey, we're collecting this information for data and analytics. Okay, I'm going to throw up another poll here. And so the next poll is actually, I'm just really curious about this, what your main privacy and security data needs are. So just take a second to fill that out. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. So it looks like, yeah, it looks like most people, it looks like there's 3 areas where it's just completely split up. The main concerns are to be compliant, to protect marginalized artists or data from people. I think that sentence didn't get completed. Sorry, that's probably my fault. And then I don't know what my needs are, but I know how to find out what your needs are. I don't know what my needs are, but I don't know how to learn where my gaps are. So hopefully that one tool we just went through will help. But the privacy impact assessment in and of itself, while grueling, will really open up a lot of this for everyone. I'm going to do a quick summary and then we'll take a 5-minute break and then we're going to go into a bunch of open source tools. So where we left off with this was actually we talked about how we're going to understand how to be safe and secure and privacy compliant with our data. And so we talked about safety. The big thing is marginalized artists and communities that we serve and support depend on us to make responsible decisions with their safety in mind. And what does it mean to be responsible in our work in the digital realm? As I mentioned, it's potentially usually the case that our users, artists, and communities we serve are not always aware of the security and privacy implications of their choices. So while they might say, oh, I'm totally fine to have a weak password, or I don't mind what you do with my data, it's our responsibility to protect them, especially the most vulnerable people that we serve. Privacy. Transparency about how we will collect and use data that is supplied to us is a good start for creating a privacy policy. And we should also ensure that we are only collecting what we need in order to provide the service or support we are offering. So again, only what you need to do your business, to do your work. Do not collect more. Security. So this is about data security and, passwords and where you store things. So what are some, not same, that's a typo. What are some ways that we can encourage our users to engage in better security practices? So this is about, again, community sharing, knowledge, and leadership as we do this work. Can we require stronger passwords? So when you build a digital tool, you build a website people log into, when there's a password requirement, should you just make it stronger? Should we require regular password changes? So if you're an organization or you work on a team and people have access to things, are you going to just say, you know what, for good security, I'm going to require you to change your password every 6 months or a year? How do you encourage digital security in your practices? So how can you make this a regular part of your practices? Using something like 1Password, some kind of password manager, is better than having a spreadsheet or just using the same password, Superman, across all of your sites. So make it a regular part of your practice. It's difficult to get into the habit of using a password manager, but it really will get easier. And you're going to notice right away, you can create a different password for everything that you use. And then you don't have issues of replicated passwords, which is actually probably the most common error that people make. And a lot of the data breaches that we're talking about they're usually related to the same password being used over and over. The first CRA breach was basically reused passwords. So when a bot can discover one of your passwords, it's going to start checking everything. Like, that's how it works. It's just going to keep trying it over and over because people duplicate and reset passwords so much. Or reuse, not reset. They reuse passwords so much. So we're going to take a 5-minute break and come back in 5 minutes, and we're going to talk about open source. So just to give you a bit of an idea, we're going to go through all these softwares. I'm not going to talk forever about them, but just to give you an idea of what's out there for you. All right. Okay. Before we move into open source, I actually want to go back to this slide, and I want to go back to security, privacy, and safety. And so the big thing here is security. We talked about passwords, and I know we keep talking about passwords. You're sick of hearing me talk about passwords, but it's important and a really, really, really common mistake. What I was talking about earlier about having these password managers to give you varying passwords, that's actually like extremely, extremely important. And I think it's too common that you're like, okay, everyone use Superman or the address. I don't know why. Organizations always use your address. So it's like, okay, we'll use our address, 1 West Street, as a password. Ooh, I'm going to make the S a $sign. No one's going to guess that. They will. They're going to figure it out. So why does that matter? The non-duplicate passwords? It's something called credential stuffing. Remember earlier I had said that the CRA's security breach in August 2020 was from replicated passwords. It was actually a breach related specifically to what's called credential stuffing. So this is a great article about this. And it's basically a cyber attack in which credentials obtained from a data breach on one service, so you get a data breach in one place, are used to attempt to log into unrelated services. Because these are machines, right? they don't get tired. Like they don't need breaks. They don't need to go to bed. They're just like trying everything in lots of combinations, and processors are getting faster. They're supercomputers. Hackers are getting good at this. So what happens is that you use Superman and your email to log into one thing. What they do is they take that and they just try it everywhere. And that's how there was so much success of breaching the CRA logins, was because this is such a common practice to use the same password, to use the same credentials. So please be really, really, really careful. And so, you know, this section here always interests me, which is why is credential stuffing effective? So actually, like, they have a very low rate of success, but the thing is, they're very easy for a script in a computer. Like I said, they don't get tired. They can just keep going. It's like really low level, like it's a really like, you know, caveman sort of approach to hacking. It doesn't require brilliance. So they can just keep on. They could get a lot of information with this really unsophisticated way of working, because we all keep on using the same password. So how can it be prevented? Users should always use unique passwords for each different service. Don't reuse passwords. And an easy way to achieve this is with Pavan will be happy to see this, a password manager. So just use a different password each time. And then there's ways for companies to prevent credential stuffing, which we're not going to worry about right now. So I just wanted to go back to that, just to remind you to use different passwords. This is a really good way to improve that. But let's move over to something more fun. Oh, sorry. Does that mean the variations of Superman are completely different words altogether? Completely different. Because you can actually, like, Superman, capital S Superman, Superman 1, Superman with a $sign. They're too close. They're too easy to predict. That's why you can actually, what I do is I Google strong password generator, or if you use something like 1Password, LastPass, Dashlane, or I'm going to tell you about an open source option as well. What you can do is it'll just generate a password for you. So strong password generator, quickly Googling it will bring up, I Google it so much, it should come up right away. Oh yeah, there it is. So you can use something like this. You can see I've already used it. You decide how many characters, what length you want. So let's say we want strong, and it says weak strong. So 16 characters. You can choose the requirements, because some websites have requirements, right? Some websites say you can't have this symbol, you can't have that symbol. So you can choose, and then you click generate password, and you just copy this. And then you store it. And so then that's a good way to generate random passwords. A lot of password managers will provide strong password generation. Good question. Thanks for asking that, Tesleen. Okay, open source. So let's start with open source. So open source, what is it? What is open source? So open source is basically code that is shareable. And I think that, you know, it's actually a very, very strong movement. And there's open source in a few different ways, but what we're gonna specifically talk about a specific technologies that I think are relevant for you. I actually removed some things from my list because I was like, I'll tell you why in a few minutes. But so open source is source code that is made freely available for modification and redistribution. So they include permission to use source code documents. Often they have communities built around them. And so the products that I'm going to show you have this. So they're free, often free to use, but that has implications because you have to host it, you have to store it. But the idea is that you have a lot of options that go beyond Google, that go beyond Microsoft, and that allow you to use something that's like either more securely hosted or reliably hosted or free. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of using open source tools? Well, I kind of described them. So with open source tools, because we're talking about privacy, security, and safety, I'm going to start with that, which is that a lot of open source tools, you can host them on your own servers, or you can choose a Canadian server. So if you choose an open source, version of Google Drive with the, the Word and the Excel equivalent, you can actually choose not to have that live on Google servers. And the issue we talked about earlier where Google owns your stuff can be eliminated. That concern can be eliminated. So instead, what we can do is we can put this on our own servers, we can put this on Canadian servers, and we can make decisions about who can see it, the level of encryption that we have, who has access to it, who owns it. So that's one of the advantages of using open source tools. Another advantage is sometimes they're free. And so you can save some money. And the disadvantages are if you host it yourself, that's a responsibility. So that's something that you have to do. You have to host it. If you host it with a Canadian company, you have to find a Canadian hosting company. You need to make sure they're reliable. You need to make sure that you can work with them. And then the other disadvantage is sometimes the products are simply not comparable. Like GIMP to Photoshop or like Inkscape to Illustrator to me is not exactly comparable. The features are not as sophisticated because this is a community building this code and sharing it versus a big company like Adobe or Google who pay developers like a ton of money and they have a big staff and they have tons of resources and lots of expertise. So the tools are not always comparable, but you know, as people doing anti-oppression work, I think this is really interesting for us and exciting for us because it means that we can take our work, especially our more radical work, and bring our values into how we work when we use open source. I think open source and the arts are very well connected. We have shared values and we have shared goals. How can I find hosting for or self-host open source tools? That's something we're going to talk about. So it's, you know, we're just going to have that conversation because each tool might be dealt with differently. But that is one of the disadvantages I pointed out where do you want to have a server in your living room? Do you have room for it? Do you have the skills for it? Does your organization want to set up a server room to set the stuff up? Maybe like that would be fantastic, but it's not for everyone. So we're going to look at digital tools, right? So, and I'm looking at mostly open source here. So to start with, I'm starting with a piece of hardware. This is interesting for the artists, I think. And so Arduino is an open source option. And so has anyone heard of Arduino before? You could say in the chat or put up a thumbs up. So what it is, it's an open source electronics platform that is, oh, Evan's heard of it, great. It's easy to use hardware and software. So you see this a lot, well, not a lot, I think it should be used more in art installations. So what you can do is Arduino boards, they can read inputs. So for example, and I'm just referring to the website. I just want to point out another thing, advantage of open source that we haven't talked about is the communities around it are so helpful. And so you're really going to get people that are going to come to you and they're going to say like, oh, okay, well, I have this problem and people are going to respond. So Arduino, it'll let you, you know, activate an LED, or when you touch something, it'll turn on a light. Or if you put your finger on a button, something will happen. Or even like you could program Arduino every time you get a Twitter message, this thing happens. So it's extremely useful in an artistic context, but it's also used in professional contexts as well. So this is a piece of hardware. Element matrix. So does anyone here use Slack? Yes, Slack. Yep. Okay, a lot of people use Slack. So Slack is a very big American company and we are all using Slack. It's becoming the way that we work. And Diana, I think a lot of people don't care for it. And so I just wanted to bring up this alternative. This is an open source option that you can host or you can find hosting for called Element, or it's a Matrix product is the overarching company. And it's basically a Slack equivalent, except you don't have to have this pay per user fee. So you can host this yourself. You can find a Canadian company that hosts it. And now all of your data is in Canada. So you're not having these Slack messages that are going on to American servers. It's entirely on Canadian servers. So just wanted to introduce that tool. I use this on one of my projects and I find it to be It's almost completely equivalent to Slack. Get jumped ahead. I don't think this thing likes Slack either. GIMP. So GIMP is, in my opinion, it's a comparison to Photoshop. It's just basically, yeah, it's a Photoshop comparison. It's quite popular. Lots of people use it. I find I'm trained in the Adobe suite, so I really struggle with these Adobe alternatives. Inkscape, it's an Illustrator alternative and similar. I think that it's not as feature rich, but it works great. And both of these, I'm pretty sure, are completely free, Inkscape and GIMP. So you can do all of your creative and your design there. Jitsi, has anyone heard of Jitsi? So Jitsi is a video conferencing software that is actually exactly like Zoom, except it's completely in browser. You know how when you try to do these sessions and then this client pops up and it can get a little bit stressful for people? Jitsi is completely within, I'm actually gonna, if you all don't mind, I'm actually going to just show you a version of Jitsi. Just show it to you in action. Yeah, so I hope everyone can see that. So this is what Jitsi looks like. So you can see here, can everyone see this? Yes, the Jitsi screen. It's basically a video of me again. Yeah, great. Okay, so Jitsi is basically the same, and it's kind of hard because there's no other people in this one for you to see, but there would be other people in it. And you can do the same thing where you can invite people, you can share the meeting invitation. Here's the security options, similar to Zoom. And this is a big thing, end-to-end encryption. What I also like about Jitsi, I kind of like this feature I find really funny, which is speaker stats. I like it because I get into a lot of meetings with like white dudes who talk forever, and now I can be like, no, you do talk more because you have the stats. And so, yeah, the speaker stats are helpful. You know, you can blur your background. Like there's all these kinds of, what did I do? Now there's all these kinds of like features that you usually have in these kinds of, in like Zoom, for example. So we have start recording, start live stream. You can manage your audio quality. There's a chat over here on the side. And so hi with a heart. And then there's a screen share option, and it looks exactly like Google Meet. And you can see that. You can choose your application window. Yeah, so Jitsi is fairly comparable to other options. And again, it's free. So if you can get a computer or a server set up with your organization or at home, you can completely set this up, or you can find a host to hold it. Kanboard is a project management software. So this is, again, a free and open source project management software. This is an equivalent to stuff like Trello. You can just put in all of your, like the Kanboard is actually really great. This screenshot doesn't show you the detail, but you can like tag people. It'll email them about their tasks. You can organize your art project or organize your organizational priorities on a board like Kanboard. So it's basically the Asana equivalent. I don't know if anyone's ever used Asana or Trello, but it's an equivalent to that. Obviously less feature rich, but you got to remember every time you want to have more features and things like Asana, you're paying way more money, which is a little bit frustrating. Linux, we all have heard of Linux. So Linux, I just wanted to show a few versions. So let's say you walk away from this session and you're like, I'm excited. I want to host Jitsi for my organization like tomorrow. Let's do it. You would need a server, and that could be just even a standard computer, but the optimization of it will change your speed and whatnot. And you would use a server software like Ubuntu, which is a Linux product. This is how you run servers. And so Ubuntu would be, or Debian, Ubuntu or Debian would be my recommendations for server software from Linux. But you can have desktop software. So there's this new OS that Linux is running called Zorin, and it's comparable to Mac and Microsoft. And but the difference is it's more secure and it's more privacy respecting. Linux is just generally better for privacy. Microsoft has a lot of entryways, and so does Mac, but Linux is quite good for that. And then there's something called the Raspberry Pi. I don't know if anyone's heard of it. They're these little computers, and they're like credit card sized, and like you can do like really simple functions with them. So a lot of organizations I find will get an entire computer, for example, to run a slideshow on a screen in your office or in an artistic installation. You might set up an entire laptop to do something, but let me see if I have information. Oh no, I didn't add it. But Raspberry Pi is like, 35 to $200, like little tiny things. You can get it for really cheap and program it to just like run the slideshow for my art project. Or I'm a sound artist. I work with sound. So for me, the way that I would use things like Raspberry Pi is if I wanted to do a sound installation and I wanted the different stations, I wouldn't want 7 computers, but I could get 7 $35 little machines that are running a screen. So they're basically like little computers that you plug a monitor and a keyboard and stuff into, and you can program them to do anything, almost anything. There was this article about how Raspberry Pi could replace like Alexa if you have enough scripting skills. So just things for you to think about. That's Raspberry Pi's hardware. We're back to software. So Nextcloud is another interesting option. So Nextcloud is basically like almost a G Suite equivalent, except it's free and it's open source and it's community hosted, but you have to find hosting. So you have to host it either on your systems or you have to pay for a Canadian host. But the idea is all your stuff can be really secure and in Canada. And it's a nice little suite. So I can show you an example. I think it's coming up. I'll show you an example in a minute of it. So Nextcloud, you can it stores your email. It has chat built into it. It's kind of like, I've always thought it was a really good solution for societies and stuff and also for independent artists, because it keeps everything into one portal. You log in, all your photos are there, all your files are there, your email is there, your chat is there, your meetings are there. There's an equivalent of Doodle Poll. So you can do all of that stuff there. And I can actually log in and show you what it looks like. Open Project, I use this for culturebrew.art, the project, quite a bit, to project manage. And Open Project, again, is a free open source software. You just have to find a host or host it yourself. And it does all these functions that basically almost like an MS Project equivalent. Really great for project management. If you do not need sophisticated project management, like this is for like tech projects or bigger organizational goals. If you need something simpler, then I would recommend something like Canboard, because this is a simpler way for you to project manage something smaller. Independent artists, I would go with Canboard, not this. Oh yeah, here's the Raspberry Pi hardware. So yeah, again, it's like a credit card size computer. And it's capable of doing everything you'd expect a desktop computer to do, but again, because they're so small, it's like one or two functions. So from browsing the internet and playing high definition video to making spreadsheets, word processing, and playing games. There's so much help online for this. In Vancouver, we go to a place called Lee's Electronics you can get it from, but you can go to your electronics shop. They're so helpful and they really want to see people turning it into something. This guy quoted $35 on this for one of the machines like he saw. The prices can range, but it's nice to know you could make like a little gaming console or, like you said, a robot brain or a home sensor or Alexa compatible speaker out of this little machine. Drupal is a content management system. It's basically a way to build a website. And so it's open source and the community is strong. I would use Drupal if you're building like a platform or an employee portal or any kind of a portal. It's sophisticated and it's highly customizable. WordPress, also open source, has a strong community. is also a web platform that you can build websites on. Very user-friendly, very easy to use, looks good, more so for brochure, but now it's starting to become more functional. People are using WooCommerce quite a bit to turn it into a store, and it can have platform features. It's just a little bit less. Drupal's more of a database, and WordPress is less so. Both of these, while they're free to use, you need to host them yourself, or you need to find a host. So one thing I wanted to talk about next was Canadian hosting. So just things, all just full transparency. I'd mentioned earlier, I have a contract with a Canadian hosting company, and this is the one. This is the one culturebrew.art works for. They're actually one of our partners, but there are many Canadian hosting companies that you can research. So CanTrust Hosting is actually a cooperative, we're a co-op. And so CanTrust has been doing Canadian focused hosting, but it's mainly privacy, and it's mostly for nonprofits, arts, co-ops, and some government. So it's not for corporate as much, or that's not the priority. And so this is where we host everything, and then we get all the encryptions and everything. And their servers are outside of Toronto, I think in Mississauga or something, and then on the West Coast. So across the mountains. And then, yeah, so this was the Nextcloud thing I wanted to show you all. So CanTrust is hosting this right now, and we're calling it CanWork. It's not being launched yet. It'll be launched in September, but basically this is how it looks. So you can see here, you can get all your files, you can check your emails, and this actually has a password manager built right into it. So this package is basically for us to just have a work package where everything is secure and hosted in Canada. And that's been kind of a big, I think that's been kind of a big deal for a lot of us, is that we turn to G Suite to package everything, which is quite good. Like G Suite will allow us to package everything, but it's not Canadian hosted, and it breaks a lot of privacy. But so basically in Nextcloud, this is where all your files would be, your file management, your email would go here. So you'd kind of log into one place. This is the activity tracking. Remember I was saying revision tracking can be really important to know who did what, where. As a manager, it might be good to know who touched what file. So it's built into this. This is focused on security. There's like a chat, like Slack, a calendar. There's forums built into this. Stuff like doodle polls are built into this. And then project management, contacts, photos. This is that chat I was telling you about, Element. I didn't hook it up here, but you can like link the chat straight in the Slack version chat straight in here. And then KeyWeb, which is just your password manager. So this is something new that they're offering, but they're not ready till September. But if you need information, just give me your email. I can add you to the mailing list where they send updates. But it's a nice little system. You can change the background. You have your photo. I think it's really nice for organizational portals. And one of the things that I want to talk about before we go, we are approaching near the end of the session, is linked open data, which we haven't really touched at all. And actually, I'm wondering, before we talk about linked open data, I might just do a quick poll with you all. I'm just curious which of these tools you might actually be interested in. So just need to find, oh, there it is. Okay, so I'm just going to throw up a poll, just curious what you might be interested in. So this poll is starting with, what is your experience with open source tools? I'm just curious if you've had good or bad experiences using them. So if everyone could take a minute to fill out the poll. Okay, great. I'm just going to end this poll and I'm just going to share it with you all. So it looks like many people have had experiences where they tried them and sometimes they work well and other times they don't. And I think that's a really, really common experience with open source. The next one is, I understand that you need strong technical expertise and I haven't tried them, but I'm interested. So that's really helpful to know. Yeah, and I think that this is a really common obstacle for us because, as you know, we want to make sure we're using ethical tools and we want to make sure we're using affordable tools, but if they don't seem like they're going to work for us, then that won't happen. I'm just going to throw up another poll. This one is about which tools you're interested in trying. So I've kind of split them up between the hardware, the work tools, the creative tools, and the project management tools. And I'm asking this question in case, you know, we want to create knowledge base or provide more support or workshops on particular tools or setting them up. Great. And so it looks like the majority of folks are interested in the work tools. And then the next is the creative, and the hardware is less interesting. I'm really curious if the hardware is an artist, because that's where I see the most application for it, especially to move into digital art. Great. Okay, so going back to what we're talking about. So we just talked a little bit about open source tools. Oh, and then Amy said she's interested in project management tools. Yeah, I think project management, I feel like in the arts, we just kind of frantically do things. And oh, Diana said from a hardware from an organizational perspective. That's amazing. Yeah, I think that we need to have a little bit more project management built into our sector culture a little bit more. And I think it's something that's really growing and but I feel like people are getting stuck on the tools. And like nobody has time to sit around and test and try a bunch of software. So I totally get that. So linked open data. So this is an initiative that's happening in Canada right now, led by a group in Ontario and Quebec. And what they're really concerned about is making sure that Wikidata represents the Canadian arts sector. So it's making sure that that our backend data, open data, which is really, to me, related to open source in a big way, it's about sharing. That you get the right results. So right now, if you type theater into Google, you get like Cineplex, but we want to see theater like on the stage. And so in order to improve those the visibility of artists' work, we really need to think about linked open data. So I'm just going to play a short little video here. It's a couple of minutes that really allows us to understand how linked open data works. Let me know in the chat if you're not getting the audio.
Linked open data. What is it? And why is it good for you as a memory organization? Put yourself in your user's shoes. Say you want to find out about that painting of Venus standing on a shell. You'd probably search on the word Venus. You'll get lots of results. Venus, Venus, Venus. And after a while, you finally reach the right Venus on an individual website. But what if the web service could help you from the start? First, by disambiguating your search, and then by connecting all kinds of relevant information, updated dynamically within the same web space. Well, linked open data makes this possible. Here's how. Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, asked us to put our information as documents on the web, and so we did. Lots of information today is available on lots of individual websites. And then he saw the next step forward. He asked us to put our information on the web as raw data, because raw data can be linked to other data. That generates connections for the user and puts them in touch with a much richer network of information. But to make that happen, you've got to do 4 things. First, it helps if your data is openly licensed. If it's not open, it's not easily interoperable. Second, you need to put your data on the web in a certain way, so that the connecting links are present in their simplest form. And each of these links is represented using the Resource Description Framework, or RDF triple, because it's in 3 parts. And all these triples will interconnect. Third, when they are online, they need a unique address, a uniform resource identifier. Fourth, you need to put them online following the standard Web Resource Protocol, HTTP. And hey presto, your linked open data can be connected to all other linked open data, creating a rich network of information, making connections you never knew were there, linking knowledge in a way that's never been done before. So why is it good for you and for your users? When other data connects to yours through inbound links, your website rises higher in search engine results, and your data is enriched by all those linkages and is more visible. But also you and others can easily build applications based on your data and the data of others, so you're being found more easily and you're sharing information that's much more complete. And the more useful your information is, the more visitors you get. The more traffic there is, the better your web statistics and performance indicators. Make your trustworthy metadata linked open data while the space is still available. You may become the canonical reference point. We think this is a win-win situation both for users and for memory organizations. The contract that Europeana has with its data providers, the Europeana Data Exchange Agreement, centres on open licensing as a way to facilitate this. This use of open data has been endorsed by the Europeana Foundation, the professional associations representing our memory organisations, so that all our public sector information contributes to the real power of the web.
Great. Okay, so that's a little bit about linked open data. Personally, I'm actually on the advisory for that group, and I find it really complicated. And I just think it's such a complicated concept that's so important. And what's happening right now is that there is a big movement across disciplines to just get this data there, so that, you know, when you type in performance artist, it'll actually give you the right results. So it's about cleaning up this back-end data and connecting all of our information. It's a really incredible project, and it's led by Capicoa. And I've thrown the